Salutations, second grade, and welcome to lesson 11 or chapter 11 in our Read Aloud, The Case of the Dognapped Cat. Chapter 11 is titled Captured, and it begins on page 105. So go ahead and get your books open to page 105 and read along with me. Mark caught up with Travis. Wrong van, he told the other boy. That one was Inglewood Landscaping. You want to go back? Travis asked. No, Mark replied. Let's keep going for a while. The road unfolded in front of them in a long gray line. It shimmered in spots where the summer haze made the air dance. Travis set the pace. His legs pumped steadily up and down, and he showed no sign of tiring. Finally, Mark called a halt. I need a rest, he said, wiping his face with his arm. He looked back at Corey, who had dropped even farther behind. And I know Corey does. We should have brought some water. Travis circled impatiently on the road ahead of them. I thought you guys could ride, he said in disgust. We haven't been doing any long-distance traveling, Mark said. Just hold on a minute, Travis. We'll be all right. Corey has trouble with allergies, especially when he's around Samson. For the first time, a grin lightened Travis's face. He rode over to rub the cat behind the ears. Samson lounged over the basket and tipped his head back, purring loudly. Doesn't like Corey much, does he? No, it's a long story. Mark left Samson with Travis and rode back to help Corey. Samson stiffened in Travis's arms when Corey rode up with Mark. He laid back his ears and hissed. Corey stopped a safe distance away and pulled out an inhaler. Travis stopped laughing when he saw that Corey really was having trouble breathing. Hey, Travis said, there's no rush. Why don't we take a break? There's a big tree over there in that pasture. Corey gulped his thanks. They pulled their bikes off the road and crawled through the barbed wire into the pasture. Travis carried Samson and kept ahead of Corey. Maria Dolores got the mic out of her basket and carried it carefully. They all stretched out in the thick green grass. For a while, they were silent, listening to the gentle buzzing of the insects working in the wild grasses along the road. Seagulls wheeled over from the gulf. A breeze swung through the pasture, tugging at their damp shirts. How come you're still looking for the dog nappers? Travis asked suddenly. He glanced down at the purring cat sprawled in his arms. Your case is solved. Yours isn't, Mark said, and others have lost dogs in the last few days. He glanced at Corey. We almost lost one ourselves. Travis frowned. I don't know if I'd bother. Not after I found Skeeter. Yes, you would. Mark propped himself up on one elbow to look at Travis. You would because you'd want those men brought to justice, just like we do. You're trying to tell me I'm like you? Travis's voice held a hostile edge again. No way. I'm me, Travis Burke, and we Burkes take care of ourselves. We don't need help from anybody. Everybody needs help, Travis, Maria Dolores said. She sat up, brushing off her arms. Even you. Hey, he said, I came to get my dog and that's all. His hands tensed on the cat. Samson slid out of his grasp and stalked away. Hey, wait up! Mark leaped up. Come here, Samson. Come on back. The cat stopped and looked back over his shoulder. For a moment, Mark thought he would return. Then he darted across the grass. Oh, no, Mark moaned. I promised Mrs. Woolsack nothing would happen to that cat. Get him, cried Maria Dolores. She and the boys were on their feet immediately. They moved in a running walk after the cat, trying not to alarm him. Samson slipped under the fence on the other side of the pasture and headed over a section of fallen wire. The detectives followed. Covered with burrs and stung by briars, they stumbled out of the field onto the shell road that it bordered. Their sneakers kicked up puffs of white dust as they trotted after the cat. Samson seemed content to follow the road. He loped along, leaping potholes easily, staying just out of reach. Fear of losing the cat forced Mark into making a lunge for him. The animal increased his speed smoothly. Mark tripped and fell full length onto the crushed shell of the road. He raised his head and spat out dirt and shell. He started to scramble to his feet. Then he saw something that made him catch his breath. "Hey, guys," he called. "Come here." The others gave up their hopeless task of catching the cat and trotted back to Mark. "You hurt, Mark?" Maria Dolores asked. He stayed on his hands and knees, probing at something in the road. "Nope," Mark raised up. "But take a look at what's literally under our noses." Travis knelt beside him and inspected the ruts. "Fresh tracks." "Could be a farm truck," Maria Dolores suggested. Mark motioned toward the field. The field's unworked and the pasture's not been used in ages. "If there's a farmhouse down this road, it'll be deserted." Travis nodded. "Good thinking, Connolly," he said. "Let's check it out." "We can check something right now," Maria Dolores said, tapping the mic. "If there are dogs around here, this should pick them up." Mark agreed. "Let's give it a try." Maria Dolores put on the earphones and pointed the mic toward the east, down the road. She turned slowly, listening. "What is it?" Mark said impatiently. "What do you hear?" Maria Dolores pulled one earphone away long enough to say, "A farm dog." When Mark reached for the mic, Maria Dolores grinned. "Just one." She tried the west with no results. Then she swept the mic toward the north. Mark saw excitement dawn in her eyes. "Lots of dogs," she said, speaking loudly over a noise the boys couldn't hear. "Then this road must turn ahead," Mark said, unwilling to give up his theory. "Let's check it out." "Aren't we supposed to call the police?" Corey asked. "Not yet," Travis said. "What proof do we have of anything right now? What would you tell them?" Mark nodded. "We don't even have a decent suspicion. What would Sheriff Hadley say if we told him we'd heard dogs barking? Besides, Samson has disappeared down that road, and I'm going to get him back." Corey shrugged. "I guess you're right." "Then let's stop talking and get going," Travis said. Sure enough, a few yards ahead, the road curved and turned north. The detectives crawled over a gate and followed the road. They came to a long, unused yard, overgrown with palmettos, tangled vines, and untrimmed shrubbery. "Hey," Travis said quietly, "this is the old Talmadge house. I heard some folks used it for a summer place a long time ago. It's been deserted for years." The four crouched behind one of the bushes and stared at the weather-worn house. It sat solidly in the underbrush, enduring in spite of the sagging porch roof, the boarded-up windows, and the splintered steps. "It looks creepy," Corey whispered. "Nobody in his right mind would want to live out here anyway. Let's go." "Wrong, Corey," Maria Dolores whispered back. "Check that out." The van was barely hidden by the overgrown bushes, but its color blended so well that it was almost unnoticeable. A movement at the front of the house caught Mark's attention. He groaned. "And look at that!" Samson emerged from under the broken steps and headed around the side of the house. "Now what?" Mark squatted down beside Travis. I promised Dad that we'd only check it out, but now I've got to get that cat back. Get down, Travis said. The door to the house creaked open. Two men stepped out on the porch. It's them, Corey gasped. They're the ones who tried to take Cinnamon. Mark crouched lower as the men came down the front steps. One man got into the van and backed it around to the porch. The taller man moved about restlessly, his eyes darting about. It's time we got out of here, he said. This is the weirdest place we've ever worked. Crazies in the house, crazies on the streets. You just let yourself get spooked, Albert, the other man said. He spoke loudly enough to be heard over the barking dogs. Between this town and Inglewood, we have a good supply for Eldridge. Must be close to $3,000 or $4,000 in it for us. Spooked? The man called. Albert straightened up, visibly outraged. Some weirdo running around with a razor, a thing floating in the air, and voices from outer space in my ear? You'd be spooked too, Mick, he finished weakly as Mick turned around. The only thing that is weird around here is you, Mick said roughly. Now get down here and help me load this van. Albert moved reluctantly down the steps. All I can say, he complained, is it's a good thing we're pulling out right now. I wouldn't spend another night in this dump. Hurry up then, his partner snapped, or we'll be all night loading those dogs. Mark gave Travis a dismayed look. We need the police now, he whispered. Maria Dolores pulled at his arm. I'll go, she said softly. Mark nodded. We'll keep an eye on things here, he whispered back. Maria Dolores crept backward into the tangled grass. The boys watched until she was out of sight. Then Mark pointed to a sheltering tree and began to creep toward it. The boys understood and followed him. Mark slid under a huge mass of dangling honeysuckle vines. Travis followed him through and released the springy vines. They swung back, swishing across Corey's face. Corey gasped. Mark grabbed Travis and jerked him into the shadows just as Corey sneezed. Honeysuckle. What's that? Albert spun around. His partner charged into the clump of vines. Corey sneezed again and again. Mick hauled him out into the open. Corey stared up at his captor and let loose another series of sneezes. The man dropped him on the steps in disgust. A runny-nosed kid. Of all the... This has got to be the worst job we've ever pulled. What are we going to do with him? Albert asked. That's a good question, his partner said sourly. Underneath the concealing vines, Mark and Travis stared at each other. Take him inside and lock him in the empty room, Mick said. We'll figure out what to do with him later. The empty room? The thin man's eyes widened. Yeah, his partner replied. If you're right, maybe we won't have to do anything with him. Albert gave Corey a pitying look. Come on, kid, he said. Let's go. Mark and Travis watched from the shadows of the vines as the man led Corey inside. Mark pressed the light on his watch. He read the numbers in the faint glow. It'll take half hour for Maria Dolores to get back to town, he whispered, and maybe another 10 or 15 minutes for the sheriff to get here. If they'll stay put that long, we'll be okay. And what if they don't? Travis whispered back. Mark didn't answer. Inside the house, Albert pushed Corey down in an old chair. Corey sank into its tattered depths, wincing as a broken spring hit his side. Here, kid, the man said. I wouldn't put a dog in that empty room, he giggled. A dog, get that, kid? Corey glanced around uneasily. Don't try anything, kid, his captor said. Mick's outside. Just sit there and I'll get some twine from the kitchen. You won't move, will you? Corey shook his head without speaking. Good. Corey sat stiffly in the chair and listened to the man's movements in the kitchen. I told Mick not to leave that door open, Albert fussed. Garbage spilled everywhere, drawers pulled out, doors left open, junk everywhere. Ah, here it is. He reappeared in the front room, holding a ball of heavy twine. This ought to hold you, he said. He folded a length of the twine several times, then wound it around Corey's wrists. He did the same to Corey's legs. There, he said cheerfully. You look like a chicken ready to be plucked. Corey sneezed again. Albert paused on his way to the door. He looked back at Corey. Summer cold? Corey shook his head. Allergies. You got one of those inhaler things? Albert asked, looming back over Corey. Corey nodded, and Albert patted the boy's pockets. Here it is. He held it for Corey to take a breath, then inspected him. Don't want to turn you loose, huh? Ah! He separated the lengths of twine around Corey's wrists and retied them. Leaving a space between the wrists, he looped the twine behind Corey's head, pulling his hands to his face. Here, he said, putting the inhaler in Corey's right hand. That's the best I can do. Mick appeared at the doorway. Get a move on, Albert, he snapped. Coming, Albert replied sharply. He headed for the door. Just sit tight, he called back over his shoulder, and don't waste your breath yelling. There's nobody around for miles. Corey sneezed. Okay, boys and girls, that was chapter 11. We'll read chapter 12 next time. Have a great day.